Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Cremanda for YogaUOnline, and I'm here today with Beth Gibbs. Beth is a certified yoga therapist, an international workshop presenter, and the author of the book, Enlighten Up, Finding Clarity, Contentment, and Resilience in a Complicated World. She has 20 years of experience training yoga students, teachers, and therapists, and she's created a way to think about bringing our yoga practice off the mat with what she calls a 5-layer model of self-awareness. She's taught her model to yoga practitioners and professionals, and she's also developed a version of it for children, which she's brought to schools, after-school programs, summer camps, and the like. Beth is a member of the wildly popular blog, Yoga for Healthy Aging. She's a writer for that blog. And she's also served on the Educational Standards Committee that devised the standards for the International Association of Yoga Therapists for yoga therapy certification. So welcome, Beth. I'm so glad to have you. And I'm really glad to have you here today, because I think we can kind of agree that we're living through some, shall we call them, jagged times.
Oh, yes, that's a kind word.
I'm trying to be polite. Between a pandemic, an environment that's just falling apart at the seams, and just in this increasingly difficult political environment. And this doesn't even factor in job insecurity, taking care of aging parents, raising children, paying mortgage, all of these things that go into living from day to day. And it's so easy when the times get tough to just lose ourselves. That's why I'm very interested in your model. But I first want to just ask you, because I like to call it the bija, the seed of your model is self-awareness. Why is that important, self-awareness?
I'm going to answer that question, but first I want to say is I did not create this model. It's 3,000 years old. What I have done is hopefully make it just a little more contemporary and accessible for present day by just kind of acknowledging the Sanskrit traditional yogic source, but placing it in contemporary modern day language so that anybody can benefit from it. You don't have to be a 12-year yoga student. It could be someone who has never even stepped off the mat, because I have a cousin who has never done yoga, but she got some information about my model through the book and said that she learned something. So that's what's important to me, is to demystify this.
So this is the Kosha model?
It is the Kosha model. I just call it the 5 layers of self-awareness, but its traditional name is the Pankamaya Kosha model.
Got it. Okay, so we'll get back to that.
Okay.
But let's go back to self-awareness, because I think this is where we get lost a little bit. Yes. Before we can even talk about, models, we need to go, I'm all over the map. How do I find myself on the map today?
Well, self-awareness is important, because if we move through our life on just autopilot, just getting up in the morning and we got the to-do list and we just keep going straight through, and we never kind of ask ourselves, why am I doing this? What are my feelings about what I'm doing? Why do I feel this way? If we aren't able to do that, then we sometimes can't get to the basis of what issues or situations we're dealing with. For instance, I'll give you an example. I'm in a writer's group, no surprise, but last evening, as a result of some difficulty in a committee meeting I had a conversation with the person who chairs the committee. Her response to what had happened in the meeting was, I own my stuff. I always own my stuff. My internal response was, after having observed her for some time, yes, you own your stuff, but there's no change. It's just the stuff repeats and repeats and repeats. So if and when we become self-aware, then we not only know the what of our stuff, we know the why, and then we have 3 choices. We can consciously choose to make a change that's going to be helpful, or we can decide, you know what, this is who I am, I'm not changing. But if we're self-aware, we are also aware of the consequences that can come as a result of that choice. And we're going to have to be able to accept them. And sometimes there is no chance or opportunity for change. Let's say somebody who's dealing with a terminal illness, that's not going to reverse. So being self-aware can lead to healing, because I think there are many examples of people who have been cured from a disease or a situation, but they're not healed. Nothing changes. Or someone who is terminally ill and that's not going to change, they can be healed through self-awareness. So I think self-awareness and the ability to understand ourselves deeply on all 5 levels helps us live more balanced in this crazy, complicated world we all share, as you described in the beginning.
Would you say, just as you're talking, it's occurring to me that there would be some comfort in finding that what I call a true north, but your own internal, that you're still there. Sometimes it's a relief to find out that you're still there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that's the core. And sometimes the way people think about self-awareness is from the outside in, body first, because we live in a 5-sense material world. And so that makes perfect sense. Most of us, well, many of us step on a yoga mat for the first time because we're interested in doing something with our body. I mean, that's what happened to me. I liked to move, and this was an interesting and different way to move. And I was like, oh, this is nice. I like the way my body feels. And then a few years later, it was like, ooh, something's changing up here as well. And it was a big surprise. I mean, because you hear people talk about transformation and personal growth. And
sounds great. It sounds great. And
getting from the self-awareness with a lowercase s to self-awareness with a capital uppercase S. And you start off with the small s, and then one day something just goes, oh my God, I think I get a glimpse. And then everything changes. So, yeah. So whether you start from the outside in or the inside out, I mean, any place you start, you're working on everything. So you pick the place where you want to start, and you just follow along the path that you've chosen.
So you mentioned, well, we both mentioned the Kosha model, and I'm not a yoga scholar, but I know that I think that has its roots in the Upanishads. If I'm not mistaken, so do some other yoga models like the gunas, the kleshas. This, I hate saying the date, but it's a really old text.
It's about 3,000 years old, and it's from the Upanishads are part of a larger philosophical model called Vedanta. And about the time that Vedanta and the Upanishads sort of morphed into traditional yoga philosophy, people were at the point where they were saying, rather than focus on rituals and priests to help me out, maybe I should look inside. So that's where it started. And when the Taittiriya Upanishad was written, in it was this description of the 5 koshas, the Pankamaya kosha model. And when I first learned about it in my 200-hour yoga training, I was like, okay. And so I went home from my training and I said, okay, I've got this intellectually. I can see why it makes sense, but I can't.
How's it relevant?
Yeah, exactly. And it was so funny because I said, I can't teach my students this because I'm not getting this. It took, interesting, 9 months, just about the same time it takes to make a baby. And about 9 months after that, I was like, oh, I think I'm beginning to see the relationship and understand these 5 layers. And I mean, and in the West, we've been we've learned, and researchers are working with the mind-body model, and regular allopathic medicine now works with the mind-body model. And that's a 2-layer model. And so the koshas, or as I call them, so we're talking plain English, the 5 layers of self-awareness, that gives you, in my opinion, a much deeper foundation on which to do self-exploration and understand the importance of self-awareness through all those layers. Because, like I said, if we are always living our lives on autopilot, then life goes around us. I like to call, I don't know if I can, well, I won't say it, but one half of this wheel of life is covered in sugar. The other half of the wheel is covered in another
It's
S
covered in
word.
something that is not sugar.
Starts with S and ends in T and has an HI in the middle. So this wheel just steady turns around and around and around and around. And if we're sitting in the middle, just going, we're spinning with it. But if we can get that center and we can begin to look at ourselves fully, completely, we're like, oh, here comes the sugar. All right, I'm not going to get too excited because I know it's temporary. And then comes, oh, here comes the other stuff.
Okay, this is the
All
other
right,
part.
it's temporary. I kind of have a grip on myself. I know how I'm going to get through. It's going to be okay. And if it isn't, I'm going to be okay with whatever, because that's it.
That's awesome. These models, as you say, they're through 3,000 years old, they're very elegant, all of them, all of these conceits, and so prescient. They speak to something that is timeless in the human condition, because if you think of these 5 layers, the Sanskrit terms maybe have been translated, but the sense, the logic of them is absolutely solid.
Absolutely solid. Absolutely solid. It's like somebody could have written them yesterday in less flowery spiritual language, but absolutely.
That's what you're here for.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Because I had to do it for myself and I had to do it for my students. So over time, it just said, well, where are other books about this? If it's so important and, as you say, so prescient, why aren't there more books on it? And so I went looking. I found a couple of pamphlets that were steeped in Sanskrit. I understood them by then, but that wasn't what I wanted. And then BKS Iyengar also wrote a book, but steeped in Sanskrit, and he mixes up all those things, the gunas, the chakras, the elements, Ayurveda, the whole 9 yards. And I'm thinking, that's not going to work either. So then I said, well, maybe you should write your own. So that's what I did.
Yeah, and you picked the koshas, which I think is the most user-friendly of those models. Although the gunas, I love the energetic piece of that you're, when I worked with really active kids, I'm going to say active kids because I won't put a label on them.
Yes.
I thought, man, these kids spend their whole life with people saying they're bratty, and I'm just looking at energy. I'm just looking at energy that needs a terminal point, that needs some help. And if I can help them move their energy, but I think you go back to the elegance of these systems, and certainly the kosha model, that idea of the layers, but they're not layers, they're interconnected. It kind of emulates connective tissue in the body and muscle and sinew, and all of it is of a piece.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all. And when people describe them, I think Iyengar does this too. He describes them as like an onion that you would peel away. That's fine. You can get the idea of layers there. Others describe them as Russian dolls. One little, you keep taking off the top one and there's a smaller. And then some people describe them as 5 bodies layered within each other. And if you Google koshas, you're going to get all kinds of pictures.
And the bird, the image of the bird and the bird and the bird.
Well, that too, but this was like an actual human body, a big version, then inside another one, and then another one, and then another one. And the interesting thing about that I found is that many have the largest version being the physical body, and then into the energetic, and then the mental, and then the wisdom, and then at the center is this little tiny bliss body. But traditionally, it's the opposite, because
Really?
the largest body is the bliss body, because that is said to be where we have come from. You know, we're spiritual beings having a human experience rather than human beings having a spiritual experience. So bliss is the largest, and the smallest is the physical body. But that's where most of us start, because it's right here.
That's what we can relate to.
Yes.
That's what we can touch.
Yeah.
The other things become more and more esoteric as
Yeah.
you move along, but they're beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yes.
And the other thing I want to ask you about is, because it's always presented as separate, but they're not separate, are they?
No.
You can't. It's like you can do that with an onion, but you cannot do that with a human psyche.
No.
And
You're absolutely right. And I think we talk about them as separate because we use language. And in order to talk about them and make sense of them, we do have to intellectually separate them. But you're right. I mean, it is all of a one piece. It's how those layers vibrate that make the difference. And I have a thing about theoretical physics. I love it. And if it weren't for the math and the mathematical calculations, I might have become a physicist. But I find so many really deep connections between what ancient philosophers say about who we are and what we're made of, and what the theoretical physicists are now finding out, that it's all energy, it's all one, it's all related, and we just vibrate at different frequencies.
mm-hmm.
So
you spent time, and I'm glad you did, because we need this. You spent time taking that esoteric piece we all learned in people who are just yoga students. They'll get thrown a term now and then from a teacher. That doesn't make any sense to them either. But as you know, when you learn this in a 200-hour program, you're like, what am I doing with this? What am I supposed to do with
When are we going to do triangle?
You discovered a way to put this into a practice. Am I right about that? That it's that 5.
Yeah, I mean, I what I've done is I've taken specific yoga tools that maybe focus on one layer as opposed to another, but keeping in mind that, you know, you do a physical posture, you're affecting every layer. You do a breath practice for the energy layer, you're affecting physical, mental, emotional, etc. You do an energy practice like a mudra or meditation, you're still impacting everything. It's just that in order to get some clarity around what this is in a practical, everyday, usable sense, we make these selections. But ultimately, we have to understand that it's all one. It's just all one. And some people like to say, well, the material world is an illusion. I do not like that word. I prefer to say the material world, our physical bodies and our breath, and perhaps even our energy slightly, is a relative reality. The larger reality is understanding that there are no separations. So it's kind of, for me, it was a way to bridge that divide between duality and unity. You know, it's, for me, it's just not ever either or, it's both and. So that's sort of where I landed on that.
But it is a kind of a unifying concept for times that are so turbulent.
Yes.
How do you translate that theory into actionable items? You've mentioned that yoga has lots of tools, which is, I think, reassuring for people who at the moment are maybe are watching this and going, I'm that person that is juggling all the plates and they're all falling.
I think the key, and because this is my favorite layer, and I'm talking about separating, but we know that it's not, and that's the witness, intuitive wisdom. And if in real time, when we are going through the what of our lives, there's a part of us, the witness, that will say, think about this. Did you look at it this way? This is why you're doing that. Do you really want to keep doing that? So there's these little voices. Well, I hear them, little voices that will peek up and make you realize that you need to make a change. And it might just be a change in your exercise program. It might be a change in your food. It might be a change in a habit. It might be a change in the way you think. It might be a change in an unhelpful belief. And I don't like to use the word negative, so I say unhelpful belief. And if we're able to listen to that intuitive wisdom, the witness, then we're able to make that change. And some people say, well, how do I get a witness? And my response is, you already have one. You just need to wake it up. So you just need to listen to it. Yeah, and the example I use, because it was very confusing, what's the difference between the mind and the witness? Because my mind tells me stuff. How do I know what's my mind and what's my witness? Well, I use the example of a Venn diagram, two circles, and they maybe overlap by about 30%. So I use the example that, okay, a lot of us have this real need to be perfectionists. And I am a recovering perfectionist, so I'm going to admit to that. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if I'm not perfect, no one's going to like me. I'm going to be a failure. And then I'm going to perhaps express those beliefs through unhelpful behavior, which can offend other people and make my life miserable. The witness, on the other hand, says, oh, she thinks she's not enough. Now, I know that's not true. So I'm going to try to send that message through that part of the circles that overlap. I'm going to send that message through. You are enough. You don't need to be perfect. Do your best. It's good enough. So if my mind begins to hear that message, then I can change. And I have. That's why I can say I am a recovering perfectionist. And I even took that lesson because it was humongous. And I've done stand-up comedy routine on being.
Really?
Yes, I did.
Wait, did you do a stand-up comedy routine on the Koshas? Because that would be
Well,
hilarious.
I did a stand-up comedy routine on being a recovering perfectionist.
I see. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So
I like the idea of a stand-up comedy routine on the Koshas. And let's just see if you
I could do that.
make that funny.
I can do it.
So you're going to be teaching a class for us, and you're going to go in a much greater detail and talk about some of these specific practices.
Yes. Yes.
So will you talk about that class? It's going to be called Connecting Your Multidimensional Self, a Journey Through the Five Koshas.
Correct.
Talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So what I do in the first part of the program is I talk about the first two layers, the physical body and the energetic layer, which includes breath and energy. And that's where the chakras and the nadis and all that stuff fits in. And I make some very quick references to some practices that might be helpful. Then in the second hour, I do the last three, the mental layer, the witness layer, the bliss layer, and I talk about practices that help to direct our attention to those layers. And then in the actual practice itself, I basically walk you through the 5 layers with specific practices.
So when we practice, apparently it's been said that we get good at what we practice. Go figure.
Yeah.
That's how we can use these koshas to kind of evoke a transformation. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen from reading the book.
No. You have to feel it in your body, in your cells, because if it doesn't get in that deep, it's performative. You know, it's like, well, I read this, and now I'm going to say, and I'm going to pretend. In many ways, it might be pretending for a while, but that's okay, because sooner or later it might seep in. But it does require practice. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to get on your yoga mat for an hour every day. You have opportunities to practice with these 5 layers 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, because those 5 layers are you. And they are with you. They came into this world with you when you were born. I don't know what happens to them when you leave on the other end, because nobody's come back to tell us, but they're here, and they're so whatever you choose to tune into, like for instance, if you're in a stressful situation, tune into your breathing. Second layer, you might find that your breath is up in your chest, and you might need to say, oh, okay, and get that breath deeper into the lungs so that you can calm the nervous system. Or if you find yourself in a stressful mood and your hands are shaking and your knees are shaking because you're nervous about something, take a stretch, and that can help remove toxins from your muscles. So yeah, it's a 24/7 kind of thing when you decide to work with it. And you're going to take 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, because this is it's a state, not a trait. In other words, you don't work for self-awareness and you're there 100% of the time.
And then it's set and you never have to do another thing.
Yeah. It's mini vacations, you may have 2 or 3 minutes a day where you are like, oh, wow, aha moment. And then the rest of the time you're just living your life, but knowing that it's there and that you can call on it.
You can tap in.
Yeah, you can tap in and see what's going on at each of those 5 layers of yourself. And then, as I said before, knowing once you figure out what's going on, you can consciously choose to make a change. You can consciously decide, I'm not changing, and I'm going to have to be okay with the consequences. Or if no change is possible, you say, it is what it is. I'll just accept it.
I think we should not leave people hanging and not tell them what the 5 layers are.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Give us the elevator.
Yes.
The quick and dirty.
Yes.
What are the 5 layers?
The first layer is your physical body, all your body systems. Second layer is your breath, your energy that comes into the body. We call it prana in yoga. And that's where if you've studied chakras and nadis and so forth, that's the energetic level. Matches with the breath. That can't be separated. Then there's the mind, your consciousness, your habits, your beliefs, how you think, how you feel, and how you express those aspects of yourself. Then there is the witness, which in my mind is like super important, because that's kind of like the pilot in an airplane that's kind of saying, we need to go right. Are you listening? We need to go left. Pay attention. That's the witness. And then bliss is something larger than yourself. Could be religion, could be spiritual, could be involvement in a passionate hobby, something that takes you, I'm not sure, I think it was Maya Angelou who said something that about moments that take your breath away. And that's kind of what bliss feels like. So those are the 5.
So they're the 5. You're going to go into great detail, much more detail than we just did. You're going to tell us how there's 9 steps to get to those 5 layers that we're calling layers, but
each layer has 1 or more steps to think about as you decide to work. So as you go through the lectures, each step will be attached to a particular layer. And I describe what the steps are and give you some techniques or questions to ask in terms of how to think about this. Because for a lot of people, it's going to be brand new.
And I can also tell by the way you're talking about it that you do not have to be a super yogi. You do not have to be able to stand on your hands or take your Instagram picture with your foot around your head. That non-yogis could also use these tools. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that is why I wrote the book to begin with, to make it accessible. Yes. Yeah.
So Beth, I'm really looking forward to your course, and this was a lot of fun and also tons of information. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll see you all soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.